Okay, let's unpack this. For generations, we've uh, largely bought into this idea, the universe as this giant clockwork thing.
Right, very mechanical, each part separate.
Exactly. And even Darwin, while revolutionary, well, his ideas could sort of suggest this individual struggle, right? Survival of the fittest, but very solitary.
Mm-hmm. A very isolated picture.
But doesn't it feel like something's missing sometimes? The really big questions, how we think, where life even started, illness, consciousness, they feel kind of out of reach with just that viewpoint.
Well, that's what's so interesting. There's this growing body of science, really,
Yeah.
suggesting that maybe that traditional Newtonian view is overlooking something fundamental,
Like what?
like a deep interconnectedness, something that links everything together.
Ah, okay. And that's exactly the territory Lynn McTaggart dives into in her book, The Field. It's not really a dry science book, is it? It feels more like a quest.
Definitely. A quest to see if there's some kind of unifying force.
Yeah.
And the implications are huge.
Right, because this kind of thinking could shed light on things usually pushed to the sidelines, like, alternative medicine actually working sometimes, or prayer having an effect, maybe even consciousness continuing.
Beyond the physical body, yeah.
And here's where it gets really fascinating. McTaggart talks about how even with solid research coming out of, like, top universities,
Reputable places,
well,
absolutely.
these ideas often hit a wall. Resistance from the established scientific community.
And that resistance, as she points out, it often wasn't about bad science. I mean, we're talking researchers at Princeton, Stanford, doing rigorous work.
So what was the problem then?
The findings just fundamentally challenged the core assumptions. This idea of a world made of separate, predictable things. Well, embracing interconnectedness means rethinking a lot. A huge paradigm shift, really.
Okay, so that's our mission for this deep dive then. To really get into the heart of the field, we need to explore this zero-point field concept.
This underlying sea of energy.
Yeah, and how it might connect all consciousness. And this idea that our intention, like our focused thought, could actually tap into universal information.
And how this mirrors, in surprising ways, some very ancient spiritual ideas.
Definitely. And we'll look at the actual experiments, the science behind it, and hopefully pull out some practical takeaways for you listening about how your own thoughts, your awareness, might be interacting with reality. Let's jump in.
Let's start with Edgar Mitchell, Apollo 14 astronaut. He had this incredible experience on his way back from the moon.
Oh, right. The lightning bolt experience, he called it.
Exactly. A sudden, overwhelming feeling of unity, of interconnectedness. It shook him, made him question the purely reductionist, mechanical explanations for life, for consciousness.
And this wasn't just anyone, right? He had a solid science background at MIT. But seeing Earth from space, it just didn't fit the old model.
That old Newtonian model, yeah. Separate objects, predictable paths, and Descartes' split between mind and body. It just felt inadequate to him after that experience.
So how does McTaggart contrast that with modern physics?
Well, she points straight to quantum physics, where you don't have certainty, you have probability, potential, and this experimentally verified thing called quantum non-locality.
Einstein's spooky action at a distance.
That's the one. Instant influence between particles, no matter how far apart. But, and this is key, the standard view was always that this only applied to, inanimate particles.
Not to living things.
Right. So the big insight here is maybe the universe isn't just separate bits bumping around. Maybe it's more like this interwoven web where influence can be instantaneous. Challenges that whole idea of separateness.
And didn't Mitchell actually try some experiments from space? Like telepathy?
He did, yeah. Unofficial ones with colleagues on Earth using those Zener card squares, circles, etc.
Yeah.
The results, McTaggart notes, were actually surprisingly good. They lined up with some earlier, often controversial work by J.B. Ryan on ESP.
Oh, interesting.
And Mitchell, because of his background and that profound experience, he kind of became this bridge figure, didn't he? Connecting mainstream science with researchers looking at these, less conventional ideas.
He saw the gaps in the old models.
And wasn't afraid to support work that challenged them. Which leads us nicely to the zero-point field.
Right, this idea of a fundamental ocean of energy under everything. Hal Puthoff is a key name here.
Yes, Hal Puthoff. His early interest, as McTaggart explains, was actually pretty practical. He was looking for a source of clean, maybe limitless energy.
And he landed on the zero-point field.
He started investigating it as a possibility, yeah.
Okay, back up a sec. When we say field here, what are we talking about? Like a magnetic field?
Sort of. Think of a field as the medium that carries a force, connecting points in space. Electromagnetism connects charged particles. Gravity connects masses. The zero-point field is proposed as something even more fundamental, the energy of empty space itself. It's not actually empty, the theory goes, but full of these fleeting virtual particles and electromagnetic fluctuations,
Mm.
like a constant underlying hum of energy.
So even in a total vacuum, there's stuff happening, energy.
That's the idea, a baseline energy level throughout the universe.
Mm.
Puthoff even theorized that gravity might actually come from particles interacting with this field.
Whoa. Okay.
And here's where it connects back to non-locality, potentially. Instead of spooky action between two separate particles far apart,
Yeah.
maybe they aren't truly separate. Maybe they're both connected through this underlying zero-point field, allowing for that instant communication, like ripples in the same pond.
That makes more intuitive sense somehow. Less spooky.
Right. It reframes non-locality as maybe a property of the shared medium.
And the implications of tapping into the ZPE, zero-point energy, Metager mentions things like new power sources, maybe even, influencing things with thought, like Star Wars The Force.
Well, the theoretical possibilities are definitely out there. Clean energy, maybe new propulsion methods. The practical side, actually harnessing it, is another story, hugely challenging. But the concept itself just opens up completely new ways of thinking about energy and matter.
Okay, so from the energy of space, let's shift to energy within us. McTaggart talks about Fritz Albert Pop and biophotons, light from living cells.
Exactly. Pop discovered back in the 70s that living cells emit this extremely weak light, biophotons. And it wasn't just metaphorical. He and Bernhard Ruth built incredibly sensitive detectors, photomultipliers, to actually measure these tiny packets of light.
And what was so special about this light? Was it just random metabolic byproduct?
That's what you might expect, but no. They found it was remarkably coherent,
Coherent, meaning?
meaning the light waves were highly ordered, in sync. Think laser light versus a regular light bulb scatter. McTaggart uses the analogy of an orchestra.
Ah, okay. All instruments playing together.
Precisely. Each photon doing its part, but harmonized into a whole. This suggests a level of communication within the body that's way faster and more integrated than just relying on chemical signals bumping into each other.
That level of order in a warm, messy biological system seems counterintuitive.
It really was surprising. They found evidence for a kind of high-level quantum order, similar to something called a Bose-Einstein condensate.
Isn't that something usually only seen at, like, absolute zero temperatures, super cold labs?
Exactly. Finding that kind of coherence inside a living cell was remarkable. It suggests quantum effects might be fundamental to biology, maybe using these biophotons as a super-fast body-wide web for coordinating everything.
Like an internal internet made of light. That's pretty cool. But where does this light come from? Is it just chemicals reacting, DNA?
That's the big question, isn't it? The standard view focuses on chemistry and the DNA blueprint, but McTaggart asks, could random chemical collisions alone explain the speed and precision of life? The coherence Pop found suggests maybe there's a deeper organizing principle.
Perhaps involving this light network? Maybe even interacting with the zero-point field.
That's the direction this thinking leads. Which brings us to Rupert Sheldrake.
Morphic fields. Morphic resonance. This always sounds pretty out there.
It's definitely provocative. Sheldrake proposes that forms and even behaviors aren't just dictated by genes. They're shaped by these invisible organizing fields, morphic fields.
Okay.
And these fields have a kind of memory, morphic resonance. Later systems, organisms, molecules, whatever, tap into the collective experience of similar systems that came before.
So your example, there's a field of catness influencing all cats.
That's a simplified way to think about it, yeah. Drawing on the history of all cats. McTaggart also mentions other supporting lines of thought, like Elmer Lund's work with hydras.
The regeneration experiments.
Right, showing electrical fields could control how they regenerated,
Yeah.
overriding genetics. And Herbert Fruehlich's idea that molecules vibrating together reach a point of quantum coherence, non-locality.
There's also Renato Nobili finding electromagnetic frequencies in animal tissues.
Yes, frequencies that correlated with brainwaves. And Albert Szent-Györgyi suggesting proteins act like semiconductors, passing energy and information. It all points to organizing principles beyond just the physical stuff.
Pop even had an idea about multiple sclerosis related to this, didn't he? Something about too much order.
Yeah, too much coherence, paradoxically. Too much light, in his terms, inhibiting cell function. It highlights the need for a balance, perhaps, between order and flexibility, coherence and chaos.
Okay, this idea of communication beyond just molecules bumping into each other, that leads us to Jacques Benveniste and the memory of water controversy.
Ah, yes, Benveniste. Highly controversial work. He claimed that solutions diluted so much that essentially none of the original substance remained, could still have a biological effect.
How did he test that?
He used an allergy model, looking at how certain immune cells, basophils, reacted when exposed to highly diluted antibodies. He suggested some kind of molecular signal remained, even without the molecules.
And this did not go down well with the establishment.
No, it did not. He faced huge criticism, famously the investigation by the journal Nature. But McTaggart points out he continued his work later,
In what?
demonstrating that these molecular signals could apparently be recorded, digitized, and then replayed using electromagnetic amplifiers to trigger the same biological effect, as if molecules communicate via specific frequencies.
Frequencies, like radio waves carrying information.
That was the idea. And where could these signals be stored or transmitted? Possibly, Benveniste speculated, through the zero-point field.
And there was other work on water itself having structure.
Right, Del Giudice and Preparata. They proposed that water molecules can organize themselves into large, coherent domains, behaving collectively, almost like a laser. These domains could become informed by molecules dissolved in them, retaining that information.
So water might not just be a passive solvent, but could actually carry information structurally.
That's the implication. Yeah. It adds another layer to how biological systems might communicate non-locally and instantaneously.
This theme of information storage and non-locality, it connects to the brain too, doesn't it? Carl Pribram's holographic brain theory.
Exactly. Pribram was wrestling with the memory problem. Carl Lashley had searched for the enneagram, the physical trace of a specific memory, and couldn't find it. Memories seem distributed.
Not stored in just one spot.
Right. So Pribram, inspired by optical holography where the whole image is encoded in every part of the hologram.
Okay, yeah.
He proposed the brain might work similarly. Maybe it transforms sensory input into patterns of wave interference, storing information holographically across neural networks.
So break a piece off the hologram, you still see the whole picture, just fuzzier. Break off a piece of the brain. Memory degrades, but isn't totally lost.
That's the analogy. And the brain reconstructs these wave patterns back into our perceived reality. Walter Schemp's work on quantum holography and MRI scanners adds another interesting angle. He showed how MRI reconstructs 3D images from information potentially carried in the zero-point field's fluctuations. It suggests a deep link between brain processes, information, and this underlying field.
And McTaggart suggests maybe our higher functions, intuition, creativity, those aha moments,
might arise from this interaction. An intuitive leap could be a sudden shift into greater coherence with the information available in the field.
Which raises that massive question, where is consciousness? Is it all locked inside our skull? Or is it somehow out there in the field interacting through the brain?
That's the profound implication. If we're constantly interacting with this field, maybe the boundary between me and not me isn't as solid as we assume. It really blurs the lines of individuality.
Okay, if consciousness interacts with this field, can it influence things? This brings us to the observer effect and intention, Helmut Schmidt's work.
Yes, Schmidt's experiments were groundbreaking. He used random event generators, REGs machines, based on unpredictable quantum events like radioactive decay.
So truly random output.
Theoretically, yes. But Schmidt found that when people focused their intention on influencing the output, wanting more heads than tails, basically, they could subtly shift the probabilities.
So mind affecting matter, even at the quantum level.
That's what the results suggested, challenging the idea of a purely objective reality immune to the observer, or in this case, the intender.
And this wasn't just Schmidt. Others built on this.
Oh, yes. Robert John and Brenda Dunn at Princeton's Peer Lab did decades of rigorous work, thousands of trials, sophisticated stats.
The Peer Lab, right.
And they consistently found small but statistically significant deviations from chance when people focused intention on the RGs.
How significant are we talking? Like barely noticeable?
Actually, McTaggart makes a really interesting point here comparing the effect sizes.
Right.
Dean Radin did meta-analyses, pooling data from many studies.
Yeah.
The overall results were highly significant. John himself argued the effect size of intention on these machines was comparable to, sometimes even greater than, the effect of things like aspirin preventing heart attacks.
Wow. Okay, that puts it in perspective.
It does. John concluded, we seem to have this ability to extend our own mental coherence out into the environment, creating a bit of order through intention. Our thoughts aren't just passive.
If intention can influence machines, can it influence information? Access things far away. Remote viewing comes to mind.
Exactly. Put off and targ again at SRI. Their remote viewing studies in the 70s were pretty stunning.
Like Ingo Swann describing the inside of a shielded magnetometer.
Precisely. Things he shouldn't have been able to know. The CIA got very interested, concerned the Soviets were ahead in psychic spying.
And weren't there some really striking successes, like describing a secret Soviet site?
Pat Price, yeah, gave detailed descriptions later confirmed by spy satellites. What was key, though, was that remote viewing didn't seem to be just for psychics.
Ordinary people could do it.
With practice, in a relaxed state, yes. It suggested a latent human ability to access information beyond the normal senses, maybe tapping into that field McTaggart describes.
And then it got even stranger with precognition. Seeing things before they happened?
Precognitive remote perception, yeah. Viewers describing target locations before anyone even decided where the traveler would go. Time seemed flexible.
Dean Radin looked at physiology too, right? Body reactions before events?
He did, measuring skin conductance, heart rate. People showed reactions before being shown random emotional images, like a premonition, but measurable physiologically.
And Schmidt's later work suggested intention could work backwards in time.
Retrocausality, influencing recorded random data after it was generated, suggests maybe the future isn't fixed, but exists as probabilities, and our present attention, our intention, even our future intention, might help shape which possibilities become real, like the quantum observer effect, but maybe across time.
Mind-bending stuff. Okay, finally, let's talk about healing. Can intention, this field connection, influence health? A healing field.
McTaggart explores this through William Broad's work. He studied intention's effect on various biological systems.
Like what?
Things like calming down agitated gerbils from afar, or slowing the breakdown of red blood cells in a test tube, even the feeling of being stared at.
And did it work?
He found statistically significant effects. Interestingly, the effects seemed stronger when there was an emotional connection, or when the target system was in need.
And altered states of consciousness helped? Meditation?
Seemed to, yes. Quieting the analytical left brain, accessing the right brain's more holistic processing, it seemed to enhance access to this field. This echoes ancient Vedic traditions, talking about siddhis or special abilities arising from deep meditative states.
What about actual distant healing? Prayer studies?
That's obviously very debated territory. But McTaggart reviews studies like Bernard Grad's work with healers influencing plant growth, or Elizabeth Targ's studies on prayer for AIDS patients, which suggested positive effects.
Suggesting maybe a collective memory of healing spirit and illness is being cut off from that.
That's one way to frame it, yes. A disconnection from wholeness, from community support, perhaps even from the field itself. Pop even mused about death being a kind of decoupling from the body, a return to the field.
And Roger Nelson's Global Consciousness Project. Those REG machines reacting to world events.
Yeah, showing tiny but consistent deviations from randomness during moments of global focus like 9/11, or even the O.J. Simpson verdict, suggesting a kind of collective coherence, maybe a planetary consciousness field
He
reacting.
even took machines to sacred sites.
In Egypt, yes, finding anomalies, hinting that maybe places imbued with focused intention over centuries develop a kind of resonance, a vortex of coherent memory within the field. It all points back to interconnectedness.
So let's try and wrap this up. What are the absolute core insights from the field we should take away?
I think fundamentally it's the argument for interconnectedness, that consciousness isn't just isolated in our heads, but linked through this underlying zero-point field.
Okay, and that our intention isn't just thought bubbles, but can actually interact with reality.
Yes, potentially accessing information and even influencing probabilistic systems. And crucially, how these cutting-edge scientific ideas seem to resonate quite deeply with very old spiritual wisdom traditions about unity.
And for people listening, what's the practical takeaway? Why does this matter in everyday life?
Well, it suggests a pretty profound shift, doesn't it? If our thoughts, our emotions, our awareness aren't just passive experiences, but active forces.
Then they have power.
Exactly. It opens up possibilities for self-healing,
Yeah.
for feeling more connected to others and the world, for understanding consciousness itself in a much richer way. It suggests we're participants, not just spectators.
So maybe a final thought to leave everyone with. If we really are connected through this field and our focused intention can interact with it, shake probabilities, what does that mean for how we live? Could understanding this connection empower us to consciously, create our reality more deliberately, to move past feeling like isolated cogs in a machine and step into a more interconnected, empowered way of being?
It certainly invites us to explore that possibility, doesn't it? A fascinating realm to consider.